Suddenly this man comes to us and he says, आपको देख के लगता है आप real life की तलाश में है. Gender and class and caste and AI and techno solutionism, it sometimes makes my head spin. I was like, oh my god, what have I written?
Hi everyone, my name is Ria Chopra. I am a writer, creator, and a soon to be published author. And I am very excited to be interviewing Amrita Mahale today for the Notebook Club. Her book, Real Life, has just come out and it's brilliant. And I lost myself while reading it. And I leave Amrita to introduce herself as well.
Hi Ria, I'm so excited to be in conversation with you. I'm Amrita Mahale. I'm the author of the novel Real Life, which came out a few months ago. I also am the author of the novel Milk Teeth, which came out many years ago.
Okay, Amrita, getting right into this discussion. In fact, let me not get right into this discussion and first give our viewers a little bit of backstory about us because I think there's a funny story that I really associate you with. A month ago, I ran into Amrita randomly in a bookstore in Delhi. I was just having a free day and I wandered in looking for a good read. And Amrita was there and there with her book. And I met her and we realized that we'd known each other through the internet before, like we were familiar with each other. And then, like a couple of weeks later, I got this email from the Nod asking me if I could interview you for the book club. And I thought that was so funny, like serendipitous almost in some way.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of coincidence and just the world taking you to places and making you come across people is also something that I felt was there in your book. Like there's almost a magical realism that comes through in the background under the surface of your book. But I want to start off with the broadest question that I've been thinking about ever since I finished reading this beautiful book that you've written. In context of this book, with so many characters, everyone having their own life, thinking they're living the right kind of life or the practical kind of life, and telling themselves stories and self mythologizing their life as well. What in this context is real life?
Wow, what a great question. You are jumping right in. If you ask me what the novel is about, the novel is really about what it means to seek a life for yourself that feels real, that feels authentic to who you are, in a world that's continuously trying to reshape individuals, especially women, right? And each of the characters, in a way, is seeking what they think is real life for them. And I have an interesting story of why the novel is called Real Life. About 10 or 11 years ago, I had just moved to Delhi from the US and I lived close to Nizamuddin Dargah. And I was there on a Thursday evening to watch a Qawwali performance with some friends. And suddenly this man comes to us and he says, आपको देख के लगता है आप real life की तलाश में है. And that's a line that's also made its way to the book. It appears, I think, somewhere in the middle of the book in Bhaskar's section, where a man comes and says the same thing to him. You look like you are searching for real life. And his words really stayed with me because this was 10 years ago. And I had wanted to write for as long as I can remember, but I was pursuing corporate success. I found myself stuck in one unsatisfying job after another. So I took it as a sign that I need to go and pursue what feels real to me. And this was around the time that I started writing Milk Teeth. And in a way, I think through both my novels, there is this theme of what do you do when what you want as an individual clashes with what society deems suitable for you. And this is a struggle that all my characters across both books, and especially in this one in real life, grapple with.
I think that's such a wonderful story, and I love that you shared that with us. It lends now new perspective to me also when I will reread your book, and I think I do that many times because I personally really love reading it. I find it interesting that you mention the fact that many of us are in these structures where maybe we are dissatisfied. Because for me, one of the most poignant themes that stood out throughout the novel was about womanhood, about girlhood, female friendships, feminism, female conformity and solidarity, but also female competition and female infighting, and existing in this patriarchal superstructure where a lot of our choices aren't really our own, and we're told to behave in a certain way to be the acceptable kind of woman. And all of these themes like hit personally because I feel like we experienced so many of them, and there were like parts of the book that I felt like were from my life. It felt like characters were saying things that I've had said to me, and I think any woman reading the book would also feel similarly. In particular, like there were two lines, and I've noted them down because I had like literature student moments while reading this book. There's one on page 24 where Mansi and Tara are, like it's Mansi's part, and she's looking at Tara and she's talking about the differences between her and this best friend of hers. And then she says that there's a similarity, which is that both of us are angry, even though my anger is like a little suppressed and Tara's anger is like bursting out of her. But then she says that's actually not really a similarity because all women are angry. And that, like, I had to stop and be like, yeah, like, so true. And another one on page 64, a line that goes, we save the best and worst of us for other women. And I think that too is such a beautiful line that hits so close. You've mentioned before in your other interviews that this book is about the ways in which women disappear, and both literal and I think metaphorical in the ways the word makes us disappear. How personal is that part of the book to you?
Yeah, I am deeply interested in the lives of women. And I feel like my work, my day job, also furthers this interest. I work in public health. So I work in maternal and child health. And I spend a lot of time, talking to, learning about women from very different backgrounds from mine. And what I've seen is that, in our country, it is very difficult for women, especially married women, to sustain friendships, to sustain female friendships in particular, because society gets in the way in a very big way. Women move after marriage, right? Migration is the biggest cause of, marriage is the biggest cause of migration in the country, and it's usually women who move. Women don't have phones which they can use to keep in touch with their friends. If they have phones, there are gatekeepers who frown upon them using phones. And I have seen in my work that women who manage to overcome these barriers, those who manage to maintain their friendships, are often very empowered in other walks of their lives as well. They are the ones who are looking up information, who are in charge of their own decisions, especially when it comes to health, because that's the area I look at. And to be honest, I don't know what is cause and what is effect. And I think our friends show us different ways of being in the world. They show us different ways of taking up space, of fighting our battles. And that's the role that Tara and Mansi play for each other. Maybe Tara plays it more for Mansi than the other way around. And all through my life, I've seen that, female friendships can be a source of great joy, great solidarity. They can also be messy and uneven. So it's very interesting, a very interesting canvas for a writer as well.
Definitely. I think your book at multiple places, just in terms of similarity of theme, made me think about Elena Ferrante's Quartet of Stories because there's that female friendship and competition, all of that coming out. But there were parts that I found myself thinking of Lavata ladies as well. And I think just like Lavata literally being like lost or and having disappeared, I felt like that was like these stories are maybe now coming to the fore and it's important for them to be spoken about because in so many ways this is the reality or like real life for so many of us. And yeah, like it I really like found womanhood to be so strongly like resonating throughout your book. uh Another main theme, I'd say, or like main character throughout your book is the setting. And I could almost visualize these lush forests of the Himalayas, specifically when Tara is talking about the setting that she's in, but also when Mansi goes and when Bhaskar goes and they experience not just these mountains and these forests, but the river itself sort of being this a personable character. Like people refer to it as a person, like the Mahamaya River can be both accessory to crimes and sometimes witness to crimes. Like that line also I really, really enjoyed. How did you decide upon setting the story there and then to have the wild dogs or the Himalayas as being a research subject? throughout the book. I saw in the acknowledgement section that you've also drawn upon a lot of existing research to be able to get that part right. So, what came first? The setting, the dogs, maybe something from your life you wanted to write about the mountains. How does that come
So
about?
the setting came first, long before the dogs. I wrapped up Milk Teeth in Parvati Valley, and I was living in Delhi then. The mountains were much more accessible. I live in Mumbai now. It's a longer journey, literally. And I
Hmm.
spent about a week in Kalga, which is a village in Parvati Valley, about an hour from Kasol. And I think I had just 2 or 3 days of work, but I spent a week there and I spent half my time eavesdropping on the conversations there. And I was just so fascinated that I knew I wanted to set my next novel in this place. And a lot of the conversations I overheard made their way to the novel, especially the character of Showman. I mean, there was somebody who was in my guest house who spoke exactly like him. Um, of course, that man whose name I don't remember anymore was a nice guy. I did spice up the character a little bit. Um, so why the mountains, right? The mountains are a place of astonishing beauty. And I'm very glad I set my novel in a place I was very happy to revisit every day as I was writing the novel. But I also think the mountains, and especially the backpacker culture in Himachal, um, that's really fascinating to me because it's always easy to believe that you're on the verge of a personal or spiritual breakthrough, right? So that element of of a spiritual quest, of of mystery, of excitement, that was very interesting to me. And all three characters, in a way, are in the mountains to seek some form of escape, right? And the mountains have a place where people have escaped to for millennia. So, yeah, that's what made it a perfect setting. There's no such place as the Mahamaya Valley. Mahamaya is another name for Parvati, and all the villages, all the geography is made up. But I had extensive notes. So I'm pretty sure that, the place I've described on page one is the same place I've described on page, say, 250, even though that place doesn't exist. And the dolls themselves, it's funny, I'd never heard of dolls before I started writing this novel. I have never seen one, not even in a zoo. But I started talking to wildlife biologists, and I spoke to somebody who was studying dolls in Central India, and I just found the animal very fascinating. A somewhat elusive creature, a pack animal with very interesting pack dynamics. The only problem was there are no dolls in the Himalayas. So it required a little bit of invention, which it's okay. I mean, it's fiction after all. So I just had to, take the definition of fiction a step forward.
Hmm. I think that part might be fictionalized, but there's so many parts of your book that are so real and so I keep saying so true. Like I'm on the internet all the time, so I'm just like so true, so true. But they felt so true to life in the sense that I know it took you 5 to 6 years to write this book, but things that are still relevant today. For example, the thing about AI chatbots and people almost developing like a romantic relationship with AI chatbots in some way. And then having that kind of human interaction with them, I think, is very resonant to what is happening today in the sense of young people quite literally dependent on AI for fulfilling their emotional needs. I also found the character of Bhaskar and the way he responds to Tara and in some way moralizes her in the sense of this is how girls should behave. And the second she's sexually open with him, it becomes like, oh, you're a slut because then she rejects him. This I found quite resonant of how incel culture or just this extremism between gender dynamics is taking place today. Um, how did you design the incorporation of all of these themes and other things like surveillance culture, tech, techno solutionism, which is a term that I got introduced to by your book, but is so relevant today in the sense of all these larger companies trying to throw money at tech products to solve very human problems in our world. How did you come about the incorporation of all of these themes into this book over 6 years and still have them be relevant today?
think a lot of it was very organic. Now, when people ask me, how did you decide to write a novel that tackles gender and class and caste and AI and techno solutionism, it sometimes makes my head spin. I was like, oh my God, what have I written? This sounds very, very complex. But because it happened very organically, I think I didn't realize that the novel had taken on so many dimensions. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
heart of the novel was fairly clear to me right from the beginning, that this was a novel about seeking a real life. And AI and tech complicate the question of what is real. And Bhaskar's character
Yeah.
was a very difficult character for me to write. He's a very polarizing figure. Early readers, my editor, and readers who are coming to the book now have had very strong reactions to this character. And he is a lot like men I've known in engineering college, in grad school. I worked in Silicon Valley for several years. I work in AI for social impact now. So I've met men like Bhaskar, for the last 15 years. And he's a lonely man, right? And I mean, our culture is going through a loneliness epidemic. So, in that way, he's not different from many young men around the world. Uh, but his loneliness in this case curdles into obsession, and very terrible things happen to him. He is a victim of bullying, of rejection, but what is interesting to me is the way he responds each time something like this happens, and he seems to
Yeah.
lash out at the women in his life, in his orbit, even if there are other people involved. And that was very interesting to me. This is something I have seen in men I have known over the years, and I think it's because men like Bhaskar have been taught by the world that women owe them attention, affection, control, right? And when they don't get what they think they are owed, they turn bitter, cruel, violent, right? And this culture of entitlement and victimization and victimhood is also at the root of the incel culture, or of online misogyny. So this was very interesting for me to explore. And the other reason why Bhaskar's character is very interesting is he's not very self aware, but he is a sensitive soul, right? So he does pay attention to how things make him feel. And he realizes that in some ways, his use of technology has left him feeling isolated. And he talks about how tech takes away friction from life in a way that makes life feel less meaningful. But on the other hand, he's also trying to find intimacy in an AI chatbot, right? So there is some amount of hypocrisy, or a lack of self awareness there, which was also very intentional.
I had a couple of questions, in fact, around all of this tech space. One of that being, how has your experience in tech and in engineering helped you characterize Bhaskar specifically? Because he too reminds me of a lot of tech bros that we have around us, and in particular, like a few specific instances, like you mentioned, when he gets catfished by a group of friends, but he immediately forgives the men who were part of catfishing him, and then it's the one woman who he knows was involved in it who becomes like this villain for the rest of his life. And yeah, like I think you've clarified at least that for me. But this thing about fiction also that I found interesting was that he is immediately aware of the fact that this homogeneity that a
Mhm.
fictionless lifestyle induced by tech adds to our life is not something that he likes. But the second that a tech chatbot, for instance, responds a way that he doesn't like he immediately shuts down and becomes like this violent person. So even this thing of him not understanding what he wants, I found him to be a strangely sympathetic character. Like he's evil and he's a stalker and he's creepy and all of that, but I found myself in a lot of different ways seeing him as more misguided and almost like he did get catfished and he did have a couple of bad things happen to him. How he responds may be incorrect, but just I think you added like a lot of nuance there, and in fact to all the characters throughout the book. Even for instance, the class difference between Mansi and Tara, like it's depicted so strongly. For Tara, that is her lived reality, but for Mansi, um, it seems like these concepts are more hypothetical. I found it
Mhm.
particularly almost funny that she meets her husband at a protest, but then they both get bored of the protest and end up arguing about Delhi versus Bombay, which is such a debate that we see online all the time. And then even the fact that they go to Kashmir on a holiday and there's an internet shutdown, and for them it's like, oh, it's an opportunity to touch grass and have an adventure, and they get almost disappointed when there is no adventure. And these I think there's so many characters that can be seen so many ways, and you've got that nuance between not just having them be right and wrong, or privileged and underprivileged, or black and white in that way. How do you think stories exist in the grayness of characters and the grayness of people?
Yeah, I would say there's something almost mystical about writing fiction. And maybe this is my experience because it's taken me 6 years to write this novel. I feel like the characters were very fully formed in my mind, uh, in a way that I was not aware of more consciously, right? So some of these connections that you just made, even I hadn't made them, right? This part about Mansi and her husband having a very superficial engagement with the protest, and then almost a decade later going to Kashmir and completely not bothered by what is going on in the region at the time and focusing on their own pleasure, on their own enjoyment.
And yet, sorry to interrupt, but and yet they're not bad
Yes.
people. Like they're able to do all of these things, and there's all of this. Even like nobody is a good or a bad character throughout the book. Like it's just not that flat.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think they came to me fully formed, or maybe, there's a part of your subconscious that rounds out these characters when you're writing fiction over the years. So they behave with a consistency that's not a conscious creative choice on the part of the writer. Right? So, yeah, so I guess these characters kind of told me how they wanted me to portray them. I know this sounds a bit silly, but that's what it is. I mean, these characters, I think had made up their minds about how they wanted to appear on the page, and I was just doing their bidding.
That's such a lovely way to put it. And they are really like fully formed characters. Like I could see them as people. I could see people I know in real life in them. Did you also imbue like real life people from your life into the characters that you've made?
Yeah, of course. I mean, all characters have some shades of people I know. Maybe all three characters share some similarities with me, especially Mansi and Bhaskar. Tara, to a lesser extent. Tara is somebody who's so different from me that I loved writing her section. It gave me a chance to, occupy a very different mind, to to play with the idea of living a very different kind of life. So I loved Tara's section. Mansi and Bhaskar are more like me in different ways, but they also share more biographical details with me.
Hmm. I think something I found not, it feels wrong to say that I found funny, but there was like, just in general, because the book is so serious and so almost haunting in so many ways, but just like a tiny bit of humor I found was that Mansi and Bhaskar's point of view is so obsessed with Tara. Like it starts with Tara, they keep thinking about her, they've built her up into this goddess figure who almost has power over them. And then Tara's part, which comes right at the end, is literally 99% about the mountains and the hills
Yeah.
and the dhos. Like it was, she doesn't care. And that to me felt like such a real depiction. Like that is freedom. Like that is her being so subsumed in terms of passion for what she loves. And it was almost, she's a scientist, but it was almost very creative and very artist like for her to be so passionate about what she wanted. And I know that you've spoken about drawing upon real stories of how artists
Hmm.
live their lives to write specifically that Tara section. I'd love to hear more about it because I'm so fascinated by women who uh, are so consumed by the things that they love.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a line in the book as well, which is how I approached Tara's whole section without giving away any spoilers. That Tara talks about her situation as a feminist fantasy. And I suppose it did feel like a bit of a fantasy to me to be on my own for days, weeks at a stretch. When I wrote Tara's section, I was also a new mother. I had a child during the first wave of COVID. And obviously, when you have a child, your time is no longer your own. Your days, your nights are no longer your own. And like women writers have obsessed over having a room of one's own for so long. So I feel like I took that idea that I want this space where I can just focus on what I want to do away from the needs and demands of others, and I turned it into the third section of the book.
Um, yeah, like it also felt very ideal
Yeah.
in that sense. Like maybe all of us do think about just having these, these dreams of oh, sab chhod ke, I just want to be consumed by my work. And then like the practicalities of life sometimes draw you back. But it really is maybe this almost dream-like existence
Yeah.
of solitarily just pursuing what you're passionate about. Yeah, that really struck a chord with me. I went through like my whole solitary solo traveling sort of phase earlier this year. I was writing my book, and I did find myself writing a lot when I was alone and spending extended periods of time alone. I was also in Himachal at some point, so this her living in the hills and sort of doing her work, like it was, I could see myself a little bit in that. But obviously, I came back to the city, which is something Tara really struggles with, like towards the end.
Yeah.
So there's the major differences in us as well. I would like to go back to the casting class difference also another time because I think that is such an undercurrent of their lives that Tara and Mansi live. Mansi, in some way, finds herself maybe unable to break out of those privileges, almost shackled by the privileges that she's had, but also in terms of intersectionality, finding herself as a woman within those structures. All of that compounding into the reality of her experience. And Tara, who's not as privileged class wise or caste wise, in the not even in the end, but right from the beginning, finds this courage to stand up against the systems that she feels are unfair to her. How do you see courage as a theme throughout the book? Like the bravery to stand up for the things that you feel are right or are not right, and then to go about life your own way. Because I find that really resonating throughout the book in terms of will this person have the guts to be able to do this XYZ thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so one of the reasons why I picked this construct of exploring a story through two very different friends, right? And I mean, I think it's a very old trope in literature, like the story of opposites, right? Friends who are very different from each other. I mean, not just literature, but cinema as well, because it allows you two different ways of looking at the world, two different ways of being in the world. So I knew that I wanted the two protagonists to be very different from each other. And then when I was starting to write the book, I was thinking about what are the ways in which I want them to be different from each other. I think the more cliched, binary would be, one good girl and the more like wild child, right? Like Cocktail, Deepika Padukone and Diana Penty in Cocktail. So that is one way of looking at two very different women. But I didn't want to do that. So I didn't want Tara to just be sexually adventurous party girl, right? Who doesn't care for society. What I was more interested in was how some women, um, are much more courageous in a world that actively discourages women from following their heart, following their mind. So then I decided that was the big way in which I wanted Mansi and Tara to be different from each other. So that was a very
Hmm.
deliberate choice. That Mansi, is conventionally successful, but she's also much more sensitive to what people expect of her. She's yeah, so she's boxed herself in many ways, and Tara has not. And I have asked myself, like, if their backgrounds were reversed, would they still have the same personalities? Probably not. I mean, Tara's upbringing definitely has something to do with the way she is. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I was very clear that I wanted Tara to be very headstrong and not outwardly rebellious, but somebody who really knows what she wants from life and is going to go after it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think all of these themes, these open conflicts, these tensions about how women live their lives, which are so, I mean, an evergreen topic, and more topical things like AI and emotional dependence or reliance on AI, which is probably a more recent conflict and is still undergoing. I found these to be just riskier things to take up in a book because these are things that don't have clear cut answers. In fact, they are open to debate and have been debated for a very long time. And I feel like there were multiple other risks that you were also taking throughout your book in terms of structure. For instance, the timeline isn't very linear. There's a lot of going back and forth, and then there's three different perspectives to take into account. There's multiple characters often who only come in, and obviously the ambiguity of the ending. I'm not gonna ask like exactly what happens because I like drawing my own conclusions, but there's that openness and that room for a lot of conclusion drawing throughout the book. And I found it like I would use risky or like experimental as an adjective to describe the writing of this entire book. What do you think is the biggest risk or the biggest experiment that you undertook with this novel?
That's a great question. I think, and I've not thought about this before, but I think it's the fact that this is three novels in one or three novellas in one. And I don't think linearly at all. I find it very hard to stick to one thread of thought, one thread of conversation. I'm trying very, very hard in this conversation not to jump back and forth, but that's just how my brain works. But with this novel, I actually started on page one and I finished Mansi's section, then I moved to Bhaskar's section, then I moved to Tara's section, which is one reason why each section does have a consistent voice. So Tara's Mansi section, I knew I wanted it to be very emotionally heightened, right? Almost a bit soap like, right? So it's very dramatic. And in some ways, Mansi's section in some places feels like it's been written by a teenager because the drama has been turned up. And then in Bhaskar's section, you move from this first person, very emotional narration to a slightly cooler distance between narrator and character. And then and it's like a more conventional story, right? Because you're trying to figure out what may have happened. So it's a little bit more like a police procedural in the second part. And then the third section is more dreamlike, right? And it's not magic realism at all, but I did want to make it a little more mystical, a little more dreamlike, right? So this also made editing a little challenging. In the first draft, I finished off, and then it was very hard for me to switch between one section and another. So for me, I think it was personally quite hard to work on three different voices, three different styles. Some of the smaller
Hmm.
risks you mentioned that, maybe in some places it feels like the novel tackles too much. I didn't think much about it. All of that came organically. So it wasn't a conscious risk. Uh, Maybe there were some choices that paid off more than others, but not something I paid attention to. So for me, the structure, three mini novels in one, was a bigger
Hmm.
risk. And I was
Yeah.
also not
It's
sure if
in.
the reader would actually, make that journey with me. Because the novel, in many ways, subverts expectations. When you start reading it, you expect it to be a more conventional crime novel, which it's not, right? So I wasn't sure if, readers will get disappointed that by the end, the novel is not what is promised in the beginning.
I think it's interesting to me that you say that this novel is not magical realism because I found myself really thinking about magic and just a more mystical theme throughout the book existing as well, right? Like there's specific things that made me think of, oh, is this meant to imply that there is magic in real life? And I like noted down those instances as well because I found that super interesting. This thing of nature being almost this living, breathing, sentient entity, something that we see specifically in terms of the dogs and a specific incident with a dog that happens towards the end of the novel, and just the fact that they're capable of higher orders of thinking or that nature intends for something specific to happen. Other instances, for example, the fake Tara, like the catfishing Tara, she is killed off by the catfishers by having an accident on a trek. And then you do see, I found myself wondering, did Mansi doom Tara in some way by having the catfish story end like that, and then to have your novel, like real life, also in some way ending the way that it does? And the fact that Tara goes to this place where people go to find themselves and ends up getting lost more differently than she had intended. I really found myself imagining that this is a world where magic and things like fate and all of those things exist. So I think we can see this through the lens of magical realism as well. Like definitely for me, this felt like that.
Yeah, some of the choices you mentioned were very deliberate. The catfishing detail, for example, was definitely deliberate. And I wasn't very sure about how the novel would end. Uh, I think till about 3 months before I wrapped up the first draft. And of course, the contours of the story were very similar, but I wasn't sure, what the last 10 pages would be. And I mean, I did toy with the idea of having more explicit magic realism, maybe the idea of parallel universes. uh, but then I mean, eventually it's a more straightforward ending, if I may call it that. But I did toy with
I would
those
not call it
ideas
that.
as well.
Yeah. Are there any other surprising interpretations that readers have had of your book that maybe you didn't really intend or didn't expect? Or is there maybe a conversation with the reader? I know you've been on your book tour as well. So maybe something that they have told you about the way they see the book that has made you rethink how you wrote the book and what you intended?
Yeah, I think there were two or three things that really, two or three, reader responses that really stayed with me. One was about the parallel universes. There was a reader who actually made this connection, who said that the theme of parallel universes comes up very often. It's something that Tara is obsessed with as a child that Mansi remembers in the first section. The epigraph in Tara's section has a little poem by E. Cummings about a parallel universe. Like, listen, there's a hell of a universe next door. Let's go.
Yeah.
How do you interpret the last section? Right. So that was something that a reader brought up, which I thought was very astute, because even though I toyed with the idea, it was very brief. It's not like I left any breadcrumbs through the novel, which would suggest that this is what I intended. Then two other responses which were kind of similar, also really funny. There were two people who told me they thought that Bhaskar was the protagonist, and in a way, Mansi and Tara were the antagonists in his life. And these comments were made very seriously. I just thought it was very amusing. Like, two people who were very, very sympathetic towards Bhaskar, and they said horrible things happened to him. How else do you expect this poor man to react? I was quite dumbfounded, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the Bhaskar part in particular, like I said, even I found myself a little
Yeah,
sympathetic towards his character in the
yeah,
beginning because he's portrayed as this small town boy who
yeah,
gets
yeah,
catfished by like these, you know, bullied almost
yeah,
by these classmates of his. But then the way he ends up almost justifying
yeah,
everything that he does, I think it's quite a scary reflection of how I do see a lot of men on the internet, but also in real life, talking about the way they perceive the world. Like, in fact, they see themselves as the protagonist, and then everything that doesn't go their way is the antagonist in their story.
yeah.
So I mean, if readers are seeing it like that, I feel like it's in a strange way, almost a depiction of how the world is operating today.
Yeah, and he's not a villain, like you said, right? I also see him as misguided, and I don't think I didn't intend to write him as a villain, but eventually, people should be judged, if at all, based on their actions, right? Not on their history. And he does some things that
Exactly.
I do not agree with at all, even
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
there were grounds for justifying those actions.
Yeah. Yeah. This being your second book, Amrita, are there any learnings from the process of writing Milk Teeth or from the reception to Milk Teeth that you then incorporated into the writing of this book?
Yeah, actually, now I realize you asked me what was the big risk I took. I think, in a small way, a big risk was writing a novel that was so different from the first one. Milk Teeth is a much breezier read. It's also a serious novel and it takes on some important themes, but the tone itself is very gentle. It's a cozy read, and this is a much more intense novel. Right? But I mean, I would be bored writing a novel like Milk Teeth again, just like I would be bored writing a
Hmm.
novel like Real Life again. You give so many years to a book. It's an opportunity to look at the world in a different way. So why would you do the same thing again? I think the big difference between writing the first book and the second book was, in some ways, you know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You don't know how long the tunnel is. It took me longer to write this novel than it did for the first one. But I knew that if I put in my hours, one day or the other, the novel will get done. Right? So that's a very comforting thought on days when nothing is going your way. Days, weeks, months when I couldn't write anything, but there was a voice in my head that always told me, you've done this before, you can do it again, don't worry.
Yeah. I think I really felt this while writing my book as well. I was like, maybe I can't do it, like for me, it was like I've never done this before, and I don't know if I'm capable of it. It's comforting for me to know that it's gonna be easier the second time around, hopefully,
Yeah, yeah, it will be, it
for
will
me as
be.
well.
And you do so much writing every day on the internet. So I suppose writing a full book comes with its own challenges. But at the end of this process, you'll know you can take on both forms. Short.
Hmm. Thank you for that vote of faith, Amrita. Um, I think mostly all the thematic ideas that I've had that I can talk about without giving major spoilers away, we've discussed. But I do know that a lot of readers and a lot of people reading books today are themselves also budding writers and aspiring authors, hoping to maybe get into writing at some point of time. Do you have any advice or any guidance for people who want to write fiction or even nonfiction today?
I have two pieces of advice. One is, for a first time writer, it's very important to know what you want to say. And I think it took me many years before I started writing Milk Teeth. Many years of wanting to write before I started writing what would eventually become Milk Teeth. And the reason was I was just floundering, right? I was trying to write scenes and I was trying to write beautiful lines. But really, be it fiction or non-fiction, it's not about how beautifully you can describe a sunset. It's not about this very biting observation about human behavior. It's something deeper than that. You have to have a point of view. You have to have something you are really burning up to say. Once you have that, a short story, a novella, a novel, an essay, or a book of essays will flow organically from that, right? So I would urge people to spend time reflecting on what feels important enough to them that they want to explore it, they want to go deeper into it. And the second part is more boring. The only way to write is to sit down and write. And there is no substitute for discipline, persistence, hard work. I think a lot of people who are just dabbling in writing, it's possible to wait for inspiration to strike, right? Oh, I have this beautiful thought. I need to run to my desk and write it down. But to actually create anything meaningful, you have to write even when there's no inspiration. So you have to treat it as a job, set aside time for writing, and be fiercely protective of that time. Yeah, I think just those two things.
Thank you, Amrita. I think that's some lovely advice for anyone who wants to write. And I had such a good time reading your novel. I am eagerly looking forward to your next one as well. Is there anything already in the works? Like, is there anything that is giving you inspiration right now?
I wish I have some thoughts. I want to write a big novel. I want it to be expansive. It will probably be about women and science, maybe a period novel. Yeah, so there are some ideas floating around, but I haven't started actually working on it in any meaningful way. Hopefully soon.
I hope it's soon too. I will eagerly look forward to all your work. Good luck with everything that you have planned. And thank you so much for your time in this discussion.
Thank you, Ria. I had a wonderful time chatting with you, and I look forward to seeing your book out on bookshelves soon.